Hello there, sword friends. Today I'm going to tell you about this sword right here. This is the Shadiversity Katana by Romance of Men. And before I get into the video, a couple quick disclaimers. One, it's a review sample. I didn't spend any money on it. If you think that makes me biased, you know right here. Also, I do study Japanese swordsmanship, which is kind of the lens by which I'm going to evaluate this sword. It is a kind of amalgamation, a combination, maybe a more polite word, between a katana and a European style sword, like a messer of some sort. Anyway, it's a combination of things, but I'm evaluating it from the perspective of a person who has a little bit of experience in Japanese swordsmanship. The other thing that you should know is that Shadiversity had some hand in designing this, or at least guided the design in terms of what pieces could be used. I don't know exactly how much leeway he had versus what Romance of Men could do, but both of them have praise to be given and blame to be shared if there are things you like or do not like about this sword. Anyway, my intention here is I'm going to go over the bits and bobs and fits and features. I'm going to tell you about the build quality, what I like and don't like about it. I'll practice Iaido with it a little bit, and then I will use it for cutting, and I will talk about the experiences of doing that. And then at the end, I'll give you my impression on if I think it's worth the $235 asking price that this sword is. Now, I don't believe that price includes shipping, but it may or may vary in terms of what sales are going on and what it costs to get something over, but I don't believe that figure includes shipping. I'll link it in the description down below, incidentally, as well as Shad's video. He's done a video about this sword, and I believe he pushed it to failure or very close. So I'm not going to do that this time, even though that's my typical shtick. This time I'm just going to use it like a quasi-normal human being would. If you want to see how much punishment it can take a look at Shad's video, and if that's not enough, maybe in a future date I'll revisit pushing this all the way to failure. But with that said, I'm going to get onto it and talk about the bits and bobs and fits and features. So, admittedly, right at the start, I do want to preface, I'm not expecting a lot for $235 today to get a sword that is, one, somewhat unique, and two, on the long side, and three, $235, which is on the lower side of cost. You can get swords for $150, sometimes below $100, but most of the time they're not as functional as this sword is. So to get a lot of the features that this sword has for $235, I'm not expecting a whole lot. Anyway, we'll see what it has. So down at the bottom here, we have the kashra, the end cap, this little bit here. And it's a fitting that I've seen before. It's a very simple, I believe, alloy fitting. And it looks like it's made to fit on a katana. So it has these little holes for the shirodome and the ito to be tied through. And they look a little out of place to me, not having anything running through them. Now, it's not ahistoric, I guess I'll say. So there were times where you would see these fittings, these kashra used, but typically there's little medallions placed through these holes. They don't just get left blank, so it feels a little odd, a little empty here. Now, the other thing that I'll note about the fitting is that it's reasonably good. It has dimension and texture. It's not a bad choice of a kashra to use in this. I think the execution is a mixture of interesting features as well as simplicity and practicality, and I think it blends well. What doesn't blend well to me are these little screws that got placed in here. Now, I understand that this is only being held on with glue if those screws aren't there. However, those screws, small as they are, they look like they're little screws for glasses or something like that. Well, they create a little bit of a hot spot. So when I was cutting, I found that one, the handle, which I'll talk about, my hand slides a little bit, and when it does, it catches on that screw. And it's not like I was bleeding or scratched, but I definitely noticed it several times and it was not comfortable. So I don't know what the best solution here is, but my estimation would be actually putting these little medallions in like you would find on some historic tantos and other swords that just use a samigawa wrap and don't have ito wrapped around the handle. There's ways to kind of fit it through here using this natural little washer space, and then it wouldn't maybe press so much into the meat of my hand. So that would be one solution that I would recommend. Anyway, little glasses screws are an attention to detail, extra little bit of attempt to make this sword good, but I think it solves the problem of the kashra coming off prematurely. It creates a problem of a hot spot. At least it did for me. I don't practice this in a glove. I use my bare hands, and so I found it creating a bit of an irritation there. Anyway, the rest of it, because it's just kind of flopped over the leather, I'm not going to gripe about the transitions. They don't actually look bad, but the gap that I see here is not usually great when there's ito involved. Because it's not involved, I'm not going to complain about it. It looks intentional and actually reasonably nice. Which brings us to the handle shape. So the shape of the handle is generally nice. It doesn't have any kind of swelling or anything like that. It's pretty straight. I don't mind that. And it's wrapped in leather, and there is cordage along the front, which I, again, don't mind. It gives my fingertips kind of something to latch onto, which I appreciate, especially because the leather, at least when my hands are sweaty or wet, which they are anytime I'm outside or I'm cutting bottles, this gets pretty slippery to me. So I did find that when my hands were wet, I could very easily kind of turn the sword in my hand. It doesn't usually do that with Ito. This leather doesn't provide just the retention. I don't feel as connected to it as I would like to, but it's actually a little bit more dangerous than that because when my hands are dry, it's actually reasonably grippy and comfortable. I feel like I don't have to white knuckle it, and then when all of a sudden I grab it and my hand slips, it's somewhat surprising, and I don't feel like I'm in control of the weapon, and I kind of want to, like, it ruins the fun for me. So I don't really like that. I'm not sure what solutions could be done here, but I do think that potentially some ribbing might do it. If there were some risers or something in here that might provide the retention if the material stayed the same. Ideally, though, the material doesn't stay the same. Ideally, these slick surfaces are gone, and that would be my suggestion. This leather doesn't feel the same as a typical European handle. It doesn't grab me the same way. It doesn't seem to work as well when it's wet as other leathers do. It becomes a little bit slick. So anyway, that's my take. I don't know that there's a way to use this material and have the same connection to the weapon that I would like. Maybe there is, but some ribs, some spiraling, maybe some Ito cord tied on loosely in some spots to give me something to kind of hang on to would help, or would break the slide when my hand starts moving. I don't have an actual solution here, only a complaint, unfortunately, but it is a rather substantial one. At least to me, again, when I'm practicing Iaido with it, I start to notice it as my hands get sweaty. Anytime it's basically mildly warm outside, I look like I fell in the pool. I'm made for cold weather and not the sun. So I start sweating pretty quickly. My hands start to follow, and that was the uncomfortable spot. That's more information than you needed to know about my personal sweat habits, but I do feel it's relevant since it was a big detractor for me. Anyway, the leather is nice. It didn't break apart. The knots here, I do feel move as well. So if I push on them a little bit, they do kind of move around a little bit. At the same time, nothing really came loose while I was using it. I really have to pick at these to get them to loosen, or they kind of jiggle a little bit, I guess I'll say, but they're not loosening entirely. I didn't take these little washer facet things off, but it looks like potentially you could. Where these Makugi are, it feels, well, they're not Makugi, these pins that are running through, it feels like I might be able to get them off in some way, but I made no attempt to do so. My version has the Minuki attached on. I think it's pretty cool as Shad's logo. And I didn't actually mind them. They're very comfortable. They fit in my hand, and they are also fit on kind of in the traditional way. I think something that might be nice would be to reverse them, and then they would kind of fill the swell of your hand. As it is, I actually don't mind though, because my fingers were grabbing these, and they were kind of a point of connection for me. And again, given my desire to have something to make me feel connected to this weapon, I actually didn't mind the traditional spot, but I could see how reversing them might be more appealing for some if you don't have the same slippery sensations that I do. So moving up from there, I'm going to talk about the Fuchi. It's the same kind of matching fitting as the Kashira down here. And again, the transitions look intentional. They don't bunch up like I would expect Ito to, but they don't need to. And this looks like it was done on purpose, and I think it meshes pretty well. If the Kashira were made the same way, as in it didn't have this little fitting here, I would think it would work better. But these are obviously fittings that are used on other katana, and they can't just make a cap. It looks like this set was made for something else and got put on here. That is probably what happened. That happened historically as well, so it I guess fits the theme there. Anyway, to move on, we have Shadiversity's logo in the tsuba. I think this is pretty nifty. It looks like it's going to be a cheese grater, and in honesty, it does have some uncomfortable lumps that bump into my knuckles and stuff like that, but I've certainly had worse tsubas. To the compromise of getting something, a design that really means something to you or supports somebody that you're interested in, or whatever. It's a cool tsuba. It's not one that I've seen before, and tip of my hat there, because it looks like it's going to be much worse than it is. I could train with it. It wasn't a big deal, but if I really kind of choke my hand up here, it does create some uncomfortable spots. Most tsuba do when I do that. This one, though, adds a couple more ribs and a mild bit more discomfort. If these edges weren't chamfered or any of them were sharp, though, then it would be much, much worse. Anyway, I like the look of the tsuba. I think it's pretty solid. So that brings me down to the seppa and habaki. I want to note that they are relatively simple seppa and habaki. That's this blade color here and the washers that go around the tsuba. They are silver, though, and most commonly you see brass on these. It's not some wild additional departure or cost to make them in a different color, but it does usually cost a little bit more money. It's a nice feature to see them added here, and I like kind of, I don't know, most of the time I don't like when I see brass and a silver color, and then when there's a hodgepodge, but this, because it's a departure from normal, I actually don't mind the mixture. I think aesthetically it works well here. The saya is wrapped in what is like an imitation samigawa. So this looks like a samigawa wrap scabbard, but it is more like an imitation samigawa, and it is almost kind of spongy to the touch. It has, like, I can push on it and kind of dent it in. It doesn't have the same really rigorous hard texture that samigawa conventionally does. It almost feels not rubbery, but grippy a little bit, rather than like sandpaper, which is how kind of cured or rawhide samigawa would feel. Some things that I notice about this immediately. One, the kurigata came off, but I think that's just due to a lack of glue, and it's easily remedied. I believe I could fix it. However, the space between the kurigata and my hand is a little bigger than it should be. It's okay, it's not too terrible. The coating on the sheath is this rubbery fake samigawa stuff. Looks really cool, but it is grabbing my obi. So when I go to draw and sheath and I pull this and I move it around, it sticks in my hand a little bit, and it doesn't let me do saibiki or manipulate the saya as much as I want. Now, at the same time, I can draw it and the scabbard doesn't move. So there's pros and cons. If you like something a little stickier, maybe you're gonna like this. But this move here, it's a little bit more friction than I'm used to. It would take me some practicing to start to like it. What this did, though, is it grabs my obi. So most of the time, if you're doing saibiki, if you're used to moving the saya around in your belt, this kind of tugs a little bit. And on one hand, if you're deploying it one-handed, the fact that it's grippy might be something nice. To me, though, it moves very differently and was something to get used to, and not something that I really preferred. When I thought I was moving the scabbard, when I thought I could pull it back, it was grabbing my fat and my belt and moving it around. I couldn't do it the same way. That's something that is likely a me problem. I could get over it with training, but it was something that I noticed, and I don't think it's unique to this sword. This is an option I believe that some sword manufacturers offer. I have had full wrapped samigawa scabbards in the past. This, however, is this imitation thing I believe is offered on other swords. It's not an option that I would choose, having had an example like this. Visually, though, it's quite stunning, and it might be a boon to you if you want something a little bit more grippy. If you put it in the belt, you don't intend on using the sageo, then I think it holds its place reasonably well. Tension on the side as well is nice. The stitching on this imitation samigawa is also on the top. It matches the place here on the handle. I don't mind that. So when you're having this in your belt, you kind of tap here to feel where the samigawa is. This is like another point that tells me where it is. I can feel for this little ledge here, and without looking at the scabbard, I can tell its orientation. So if I grab it down here for some reason, I can feel where this ledge is, and I can orient my scabbard in a way where I can sheath my sword correctly. It's subtle, but it's noticeable. I certainly notice it more on the top. I can feel it, but it isn't distracting. It doesn't grab your clothes or anything like that. The stitching also seems relatively small, and it hasn't come undone through the course of me using this, which hasn't been admittedly much. I had mixed feelings about training with this, so I didn't do a whole lot of it. At the end, there is no horn parts. It's completely wrapped in this artificial samigawa, and if I look inside, it has, I believe, what is normally like these little resin rings that hold things together underneath here. So it's one of the more basic scabbards. For the price point, though, I'm not complaining. It is tensioned correctly. It doesn't fall out, but a simple push will deploy the sword, and it draws and sheathes reasonably well. It's not really raspy. Again, an accomplishment on a low-end sword that is also long. These are not the standard size swords that you see. It is a much longer blade, which is, again, for $235, something kind of interesting on its own. A lot of times the longer blades cost you a little bit more money. To see one at this price that is also 31 inches long and has a good command of distal taper, I'll talk about that in a moment, is a rarity. So anyway, the saya does what it's supposed to do, kind of, sort of, but with the added oddity of how it draws and sheathes. The kurigata feels like it is made of some sort of plastic. I don't believe it's wood. The shirodome are brass and were not glued in. Some people like that. Some people just like to take them out, which might be me. I prefer if they're going to be put in there for them to be glued in, but it's a personal preference thing. The sageo was a little bit on the shorter side and nothing really to write home about. A very simple sageo. Again, given the price point, I am not expecting a whole lot. The blade has a little bit to talk about. Now, it's a simple shinogi zakuri blade, and at a glance, it doesn't really have much to say. It's not folded, so there's no hamon line on here, nor is it it's not differentially hearted, so there's no hamon line, and it's not folded, so there's no hada to bring out in the polish. It's a spring steel blade that is through hardened, and so it's got a very simple, marginally above satin polish on it. and that is all I need and all I would expect for the price. It has an attempt to kind of scratch in a yokote up here, and it's reasonably well done. It's just kind of sanded the other direction, but there's an attempt to put one in. There's a bohi, or a fuller, that runs the more or less the length of the blade, and the terminations are relatively soft. I'm not expecting any grand attempt at making this really crisp and clean for the money. As it is, they terminate in about the right spot and don't wander off it's actually terminated better than you would customarily find on some European swords, even high-end ones. I digress. The shape and feature set is not particularly interesting to show. There's not much to show here, but what is interesting is, one, the sharpness level. It is very, very sharp. They have done an extra fine job on sharpening this, and I absolutely noticed that in the cutting. This was my first sword that I cut with on the day, so a little bit rusty doing it. I am not performing at my peak here, but the sword itself did come exceptionally sharp. Beyond what I typically see from most manufacturers, it has a very, very keen edge on it. Tip of my hat to the folks at Romance of Men for being able to provide something this sharp. The other bit, though, is that it has a very strong distal profile taper. So these swords, when they're 31 inches long, most manufacturers make them pretty thick. And that means that these longer blades tend to feel a little bit more clumsy. They're a little harder to move around. This glides pretty well. It's a very comfortable, nimble feeling sword. I still feel like I have a fair bit of point control for a sword of this size. It does this while simultaneously being reasonably rigid. At the same time, it has a little bit more flex than the average katana does because of that. I would say it's still relatively rigid in the cut. I don't notice it flopping around, but I bet if I slowed it down, I would see some of the sword flexing in the cut more than a katana typically does. At the same time, what you get in exchange is a sword that feels really nimble and lively, which is, again, I think something very fun and special for a sword at $235. To get one that is long, that has a unique distal profile taper, that feels good in the hand and is fun to cut with, those are charming things. Now, the blade doesn't have a whole lot to look at, but a lot of kind of through-hardened European-style swords don't have much. In the geometry, though, there's a little bit of special sauce happening here. So tip of my hat to Shad and Romance of Men for putting it in at a relatively economical price. Now, anyway, that's the bits and bobs and fits and features of the sword. I'm going to talk about doing Iaido with it, and I've mentioned some of what I had to talk about. This sword is my size. I really like swords that are this length. It requires me to move my hips. So as a training tool, this is generally the size of sword that I like to practice kenjutsu with. It requires that I pull my hips back and have a good command of sayabiki, but in doing that, I found the scabbard to be somewhat uncomfortable to move around because it would grab my obi. With training, I could get over that, but just in practice, it was a bit of an oddity. The other thing I noticed is as I was using it, it moves around. It's very comfortable at first. It feels easy to move in the hand, and I feel like it's much lighter than its imposing size would give out, and that gave me a feeling of comfort. Then my hands started to sweat, and then I started to lose that comfort pretty quickly as it slid around my hands. I would grab it, things would slide around, and that broke the fun a little bit for me, because as I would white knuckle it, it would still be a little slippery. That might just be because I'm a greasy man beast and my hands sweat, or I get pretty sweaty in the summer. So that was not fun, and certainly a deterrent to the training. I also noticed these screws. So especially when I would lose my grip and I would slide over this screw. I'd feel it in the meat of my hand, and I'd kind of be left there looking like, hey, is everything okay? What did I scratch my hand on? And you know, these little screws, they don't protrude much, but it's enough just to grab the fat of my hand and create some discomfort. So, well, in theory, like if this sword were wrapped like a traditional Japanese sword, if it had the same kind of ito and the same kind of scabbard, I think I would really like training with this. However, it doesn't. It has this substance on here that grabs at my belt and doesn't move in a way that's comfortable, in a handle that becomes a little more slippery than I'm used to. And I would have to train a lot to use this sword to be comfortable with it, and that's probably not going to happen. I'm going to move back to a Japanese sword that has a more traditional handle, or something that doesn't become slippery when wet. Didn't mean it quite like that, but you know what I mean. So from a training standpoint, not my favorite, even though the dynamics of the sword are good. It's just some of the material choices that make it a bit of a deterrent for me. Now on to the cutting side of things. So Much the same as the training, this has some kind of mixed experiences, and mostly when my hands got wet from cutting water bottles and stuff like that and would slide around, it really was a little bit of a deterrent for me. So the good first, well, it's exceptionally sharp, and so it whacked through water bottles really, really well. It also has a resilient edge. Despite it being very sharp, I cut through the neck of water bottles, I bumped into the stand a few times, I slapped the sword on the side of the stand, it sprung back into shape and stayed straight despite hitting it pretty hard, and I don't see any edge deformation. It still stayed very sharp. Despite cutting plastic bottles, you don't think that they're going to be much, but with a really fine edge, the neck of bottles can oftentimes cause some rolling or deflection of some kind, and I didn't see any of that here. I didn't do a lot of cutting, but at the same time, I did enough, hard enough, where if there was some failure or flaw in the steel, it would likely show. I also, again, slapped it pretty hard on the stand, and it sprung back to true every time. If there's a problem in the heat treat, which I would imagine would be easier to have in a blade this long and this thin, then it would likely come out when I smack it on the side of the stand and really try to bend it. So I didn't see any of that. Tip of my hat to Romance Cement on the heat treatment and whatnot of the steel. But in cutting, I also noticed some slippage there. So I would grab it, my hand would slip, and that wasn't great. Maintaining edge alignment when it kind of moves in your hand a little bit is also kind of tough. I'm not going to blame the sword on edge alignment. It's definitely a me thing, but the grip wasn't giving me any help. And so again, something I would have to really get used to. It's possible that if I put on a glove or something, I wouldn't have that problem and it would hold on. At the same time, that isn't how I typically do cutting in Japanese swords, and I didn't make an exception here. So I just used my bare hands like I normally do, and I found it to be a little uncomfortable, despite the fact that the sword is certainly more than capable. I initially had some tough times on the pool noodles. I wasn't getting the edge alignment quite right. I did cut with other swords in the day. This was the first one up, so it could be that I'm shaking the rust off or something else, but the edge is certainly capable of doing it. For whatever reason, I just wasn't jiving with it. I do want to point out, though, that I cut for the first time. I had a big cardboard box that a grill of mine came in, and I was just doing some cutting to see what was happening. I also cut this grill box, which is like a 3-pane, large, thick cardboard box. This thing, I kind of had to stop myself. So every time I could bend my knees and the sword would just go with me. I could cut all the way through the box if I wanted to. It was an incredibly powerful cutter in doing that cardboard. Not a medium that I usually cut, but having cut with several other swords that day after using this one, I did know that this one absolutely cut further, and I had to stop myself when cutting it rather than the box stopping me. So a very capable cutter with the extra leverage, the sharp edge, the distal taper. You can really generate tip speed, and it can be a very effective cutter in more skilled hands than mine. Anyway, that's all the bits and bobs, fits and features, doing Iaido and cutting. Hopefully at this point you know if it's worth your $230. It's time I answer the question, though, do I personally think it's worth it or not? And I'm kind of two minds here. Because of the oddities here, this would not be something that I would want to train with. I would ask Romance Cement to change it and put some maybe red silk on it or something, but it would turn it more Japanese, which is, I think, somewhat antithetical to the idea. This is supposed to be some sort of combination of a European and Japanese style sword. So I think that kills the vibe a little bit. I can kind of get over the scabbard, but the handle was the big deterrent for me, and also the kashira down here. So I don't personally. I would play with this sword if it were mounted like a Japanese sword, but as it is, I don't think for me personally, I would like to buy it for $230, despite I believe that being a very good price for what you're getting here. A long blade that is exceptionally sharp and has a good commando distal taper is a very solid deal if what I'm talking about isn't a bother to you. If you cut in gloves, if you have less sissy hands than I do, if you actually like that this kind of grabs onto your belt, those are things that I think somebody could also enjoy. But for me, no, those would be enough deal breakers where, despite the fact I think this is a good deal, it would be off-putting, and I would rather use a shorter sword or a different sword or a more expensive sword this size to satisfy my training needs and cutting fun. However, if I flip over to somebody who's looking for a combination of a European style sword and a Japanese style sword, this is a compelling and inexpensive offering that might give you some fun, and I could see how it would be good there. The other aspect that I would look at it as is YouTuber swag, right? There's a lot of people that sell plushies and keychains and t-shirts and other bullshit, and I always think that it's just not for me. I don't want to dog on anyone who does that. I know I respect the hustle. It's just not for me. As YouTuber swag, this is pretty solid. The Shadiversity logo, the Manuki in here, the subtle little nods to Shad's channel, and the combination of his colors and kind of what and his design in here, I think is a really fun and awesome YouTuber swag. So if I think about it as somebody like buying a t-shirt to support a YouTuber, I don't. I don't have any shirts. I don't buy them. But I would probably buy this to support. So if all of my favorite YouTubers made swords that were kind of affordable and fun and were kind of like a t-shirt, it's more expensive than a t-shirt, I know, that would be something that I would certainly be a little bit more interested in. So as YouTuber swag, I think it's about the coolest swag I've seen anyone sell as YouTuber kind of tchotchkes and swag. I know that's not technically what's going on here, but if I think about it from that lens, it's awesome, and I would totally buy something like this to support my favorite YouTubers. However, I don't think I would buy it for fun swording just by itself, given how it moved for me. Those would be distractions or something odd. Flip side though, some people like training with odd things, learning to use different weapons. This is a very familiar shape and different. I'm always nervous when I pick up a Saki-bato or a reverse edge sword or a Moro-ha blade, something that's double-edged in katana shape, because I'm going through these motions. It's this tool that I'm very familiar with, and I'm going through motions that are familiar, that are built in like muscle memory, or at least that I'm trying to do that with. And when my hand slips, when it moves in a way that I'm not expecting, in a way that's dangerous, it breaks my fun, and I tend to avoid them. This falls a little bit into that category for me. So I've already explained it, but hopefully I'm doing a better job here of explaining why as a training tool, not for me. As fun swag or just a long sword to play with that's sharp and comes with a lot of features for the money, I could see it. Now, no discredit to Shad or Romance of Men. I think they've done a really solid job for a very affordable price here. Just some of the things, not for me. Flip side, I bet Romance of Men can make a long sword like this, mounted more traditionally like a Japanese sword, and I bet it would be awesome to train with. I also bet that they could probably do some other tweaks here to address some of the things that I talked about and make some other cool combination of European sword and Japanese sword. Anyway, I've prattled on long enough. Hopefully this has been interesting. That's all I've got. Cheers, and thanks for watching.